Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You're watching NBC News Now. Here's what's happening.
If you just look at what the Taliban's been doing, you can see that they are trying to isolate Kabul.
The Taliban closing in on Kabul, the Pentagon now sending in troops to evacuate the U.S. embassy. What else the administration is prepared to do to stop the crisis in Afghanistan. If you're immunocompromised, you can get another shot. The CDC giving COVID-19 boosters its stamp of approval. A look at the latest recommendations from our nation's top health officials.
Did you kill Barbara Jean Horn?
No, I did not. I did not do anything to that child at all.
He spent 3 decades in jail, wrongfully convicted of murdering a 4-year-old girl. We have a preview of Lester Holt's exclusive Dateline interview with Walter Ogrod. We start with the crisis in Afghanistan. NBCNews.com senior White House reporter Shannon Pettypiece is on the North Lawn. But first, NBC News foreign correspondent Kelly Kobier is in Kabul, where thousands of U.S. troops are evacuating embassy personnel.
Well, Allison, the Taliban clearly has the momentum, and they're continuing to build on that today. There are several provinces that may be in play today, including Logar province, which borders Kabul to the south. That may fall into Taliban hands at some point by the end of the day today. They've already secured Kandahar province in the south. It looks like Helmand province right next door will also be theirs. Herat in the north is under their, in the west is now under their control. And these are big population centers that are economic hubs as well, and key to the economy and the logistical support, really, of the entire country. So there are all sorts of issues that could arise, given that these cities now are in the hands of the Taliban and the government has no control any longer. In addition to that, the Taliban has taken control of several border crossings around the country, at least 7 of the 14 at last count. And with this massive movement of people are absolutely terrified and trying to get out of the country, many of them moving into Kabul. Many are also trying to get out from some of these border crossings, and the United Nations today urging neighboring countries to keep those borders open for desperate refugees. At the same time, tens of thousands of people are coming into Kabul as well, looking for safety here. This is one of only 2 major cities in the country, really, that are still controlled by the government. And people are coming here from other provinces, talking about just really harrowing journeys, walking for hours to get to the capital, fleeing places like Kandahar. We spoke to one man who worked with NATO and was terrified because of his association with Western forces. He left Kandahar and just arrived in Kabul today, and he said that the Taliban is going door to door looking for people who have worked with the U.S. or NATO. There have been other stories about families bringing their daughters, their women and daughters, into Kabul to flee Taliban fighters because of reports that they are taking unmarried women and widows and forcing them into marriage. The United Nations now warning of a potential humanitarian disaster in this country, and really a crisis building in Kabul itself because of the number of people who have nothing, no food, no water, and no money to buy supplies.
Let's bring in Shannon Pettypiece at the White House. Shannon, President Biden's now sending thousands of troops to Afghanistan to help evacuate the embassy. What do you know about that decision to go back in?
Well, the White House says the president is expressing no regrets in his decision to pull U.S. troops out. They are staying the course and the plan of having U.S. troops out of Afghanistan. They are emphasizing that the troops going back in are purely there for security reasons, to help assist Americans to get out of the country because the danger and threat that is now posed to them in Kabul by the Taliban. So the White House says they are staying the course. They see no military solution to this conflict in the long run, that in the end, it is only diplomacy and the Afghan people uniting and fighting for themselves that is going to resolve this conflict, not any additional military action from the United States, despite what we're seeing from the troops going back in. quiet. They maintain their plan stays the course.
Shannon, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell criticizing President Biden in a statement saying President Biden's decisions have us hurtling towards an even worse sequel to the humiliating fall of Saigon in 1979. Shannon, there were reports of beheadings, young girls being turned into child brides, and it all deteriorated so quickly. What is the administration saying about its responsibility to the Afghan people?
Well, Mitch McConnell certainly isn't the only one making that parallel to Vietnam and the fall of Saigon, and certainly why we don't anticipate seeing dramatic scenes like Americans being airlifted off a rooftop of an embassy. There is certainly a major extraction underway of American personnel and thousands of Afghans still there who helped the U.S. Without a real clear picture of how they're going to get out there, not to mention, of course, that humanitarian crisis and the kidnappings happening of young women that Kelly was just describing. Here's a little bit what spokesperson for the State Department, Ned Price, had to say about that humanitarian situation.
The reports that have emerged from Afghanistan, not only in the recent days, but recent weeks, have been incredibly disturbing, gravely disturbing. We are gravely concerned by what we're hearing. And we are doing everything in our power to try to put an end to this violence and give some semblance of hope, security, stability to the people of Afghanistan.
But the question remains, what exactly are they going to do? Because as I was saying a moment ago, this administration, this president is still firm on their belief that there is not a military solution, that sending troops back into Afghanistan is not going to be a long-term solution. They say they are trying to continue with diplomacy, to continue with talks, that the U.S. will maintain some presence there in the embassy, and then this hope and urging of the Afghan people and the Afghan forces to try and unite and resolve this issue on their own.
All right, Shannon Pettypiece of the White House, thank you so much. Let's bring in Kevin Barron, the founding executive editor of Defense One. It's a defense and national security news and analysis site. Kevin, thanks so much for being here. When the president officially announced the U.S. was pulling out of Afghanistan, he also said we had accomplished our goals there. Did he overstate our progress, or did we misread Afghan security forces' potential to take on the Taliban?
Yes to all that. The U.S. accomplished its goals of turning Afghanistan, of preventing Afghanistan from being a launching point for attacks on the United States homeland, which has not happened, and in degrading Al-Qaeda, the goal of 20 years ago, which also has happened. But in the pullout, we're seeing the unfortunate prediction of many of the Taliban marching its way to Kabul. And I think, Ned Price's comments are frankly just not true. The United States isn't doing everything they can to prevent violence. If the U.S. wanted to do everything it could, then it would be, strafing Taliban positions all over the country. It would be deploying 10,000 combat troops, not 3,000, rescue troops to help evacuate an embassy. What the United States is doing is holding the line, trying to prevent the Taliban from storming into Kabul and taking the entire country by force and declaring themselves in power, something NATO has just said in the last 24 hours. If that happens, then the Taliban loses all international standing they may have even thought they might enjoy. And so it seems the best that the administration is pushing for is the Taliban to stop, get close to Kabul, use their leverage to get back to a negotiating table and to some sort of political solution. But it's pretty messy.
Kevin, this war has gone on for just about 20 years. It's cost more than $2 trillion. Above all, it's killed more than 2,000 service members. What do you think we got wrong here? Can you pinpoint one major mistake, or is it just such a complicated situation that no matter how long we were there, it was not going to be easy or clean to leave?
Well, almost every single commander of this war from the beginning has said that this was going to be a generational shift. It was going to take 10, 30, 50, 70, 100 years for an entire region to get away from violent extremism and towards some sort of semblance of, Western envisionment of a functioning, country and democracy. And frankly, the country ran out of patience for that length of time, as many predicted it would. Of course, there's no one single, thing that went wrong. Right now, a lot of the commanders of that war have said the thing that went wrong was Biden deciding to pull out and Trump deciding to reduce troop levels to below 10,000. That all it took was 8,000 or so troops in Afghanistan to keep the lid on the violence that was surfacing, that backing for the Afghan government was enough to give Afghanistan the decades that they would need to change and to prevent that, these attacks from the homeland and from everything else from happening, from terrorist groups becoming active in that region. And so removing U.S. troops removed that lid, and this is the ultimate outcome. It's a case now. It depends on who you ask. I've written this story a year ago. Who gets to tell the story of Afghanistan? Is it the troops who on the ground who are questioning, their commitment and if it was all worth it? Is it the senior leaders who are questioning the political leaders, or is it the American voters who put this administration into office, the administration that is, Joe Biden and his hard, cold, tough love stance that he's giving the Afghans right now?
All right, so there is no question, Kevin, that the Taliban is making progress here. Let's talk more about what the situation is in Afghanistan for the people who live there every day. In an op-ed in The Atlantic, Mike Jason, a retired 2019 U.S. Army colonel who commanded units in Afghanistan, wrote, "We failed to establish a necessary infrastructure that dealt effectively with military education, training, pay systems, career progression, personnel, accountabilities, all the things that make a professional security force." But here's Pentagon spokesman John Kirby at the press briefing earlier today.
We still believe that they could make a difference on the ground. We will do what we can from the air, but they have the advantage. They have greater numbers. They have an air force. They have modern weaponry. It's indigenous forces that can make the difference on the ground.
But when we hear what's going on there, right, I mean, families taking their children, their young women and their widows and trying to hide them in Kabul so that they don't get married off. When you hear about people running from their homes with absolutely no possessions in their hands, are we just fooling ourselves thinking that the forces there on the ground can stop the Taliban from taking Kabul, from completing this march?
Look, I think both Mike and John Kirby are right in what they're saying. They're not mutually exclusive things. I know Mike and I know the position he's coming from. But frankly, the Afghans had nothing before the war, and they do have something after the war when you talk about building a military. And a lot of us who went in and out of Afghanistan for many years have written the story about how, the United States-led effort found enough Afghans, hundreds of thousands of Afghans who signed up to fight for their country. Many of them had to learn how to read, much less how to shoot or how to collect pay, how to do things like joint combined arms and maneuvers and advanced modern professional military capabilities. That said, it takes will. And it takes faith in the government and the people that you're fighting for. A lot of us who have covered the special operations effort of training these foreign forces so that the United States fights what's called by, with, and through them, have said that only in Syria has the United States ever had a perfect partner. With the SDF, when you had Western-friendly, very capable, very eager fighters who were willing to put it all on the line to do the fight with a lot of help from the United States in the background. And that the Afghans have had that in spits and spurts. And as Mike says in his piece, the special operations forces in Afghanistan are quite capable. They're nowhere near the level of Americans. No one else in the world is. But the forces who are far out in country don't think they have that the government has their back. They don't have faith in the government. And as soon as the United States says that they weren't going to back the Afghan government, well, that was it. They dropped their arms, and they're not risking the fight. We saw this happen in Iraq, the exact same scenario. So I think it's true that the mission to create an Afghan force that's capable has been problematic, and it's taken lots of fits and starts. But John Kirby is also right. The Afghans have an air force. The Afghans have the numbers. They just don't have the willpower. And frankly, a lot of the reason they don't have the willpower is because Joe Biden hung them out to dry. That's what people think.
So should Biden send troops back?
It depends on what the policy objective is, right? So they're saying they want to have the ability to go after terrorist groups still, to go after al-Qaeda, to still chase after, terrorists in the region or help the Afghans with forces. So the United States has troops in the region. The troops they're sending back now are only troops to pull out Americans. Sending troops back in would require something even larger. And today on our site, General John Allen, a former ISAF commander, wrote a very long op-ed saying exactly that Joe Biden should set a red line, make it Kabul, make it whatever it is, and tell the Taliban right now, if you cross this line, here's what the consequences will be. And the consequences will be a much larger force of combat troops, special operators, ground taskers, air assets that will fight back and hold the ground for the Afghan government through some sort of peace process. Right now, the United States isn't even prepared to commit to that. They say that they'll maintain the ability for over-the-horizon, capabilities, which they do to a certain extent. But those capabilities are only for specific things the U.S. cares about, like going after specific high-value targets. They're not being used to save Herat, to save Helmand, to save all these other capitals that have fallen in the last week. So right now, I think people are giving up on the rest of the country, thinking Kabul has to hold. Ghani has to be able to stay in office. And if they can hold and somehow convince the Taliban not to take Kabul, maybe, frankly, the Taliban knows they can't take Kabul, by the way. They don't have the forces. Then there will be a stalemate or some sort of ceasefire that can have a political solution. But right now, it's not even worth talking about should the United States go back in. There's no sign that this White House wants that to happen.
It's a great piece on your site today. An analysis that I read start to finish lays out some really good thoughts on perhaps what we could be doing differently. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on today to talk with us about the crisis in Afghanistan. Today, a CDC advisory group recommending that certain patients with weakened immune systems get a COVID booster shot. Yesterday, the FDA authorized that extra dose. NBC News senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres joining me now. Dr. John, the committee's vote was unanimous. The CDC director still has to sign off, but that doesn't seem to be an issue. So who specifically will this affect?
Yeah, you're right, Allison. Right now, the one step left is Dr. Walensky to sign off. Everybody expects her to go ahead and do that, which means that this extra dose will be available for those that they said should be getting it. And what we're talking about are certain immunocompromised people. And those are people, according to the CDC, that have moderate to severe immunocompromised situations or issues. And by that, the examples they gave are cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy at this point, organ donation patients, organ replacement patients who are undergoing the anti-rejection drug medications, and their immune systems have been severely depressed or reduced. And so what they're saying here is this is going to be something that they can't give blanket statements for. They need to go ahead and do it on a one-on-one basis with their physicians, and that's what they're going to do moving forward here. But this is a great step, and just one big semantic word here is they're talking about a third dose for those who got the first 2 doses but did not get the immune system response we wanted, versus a booster shot, which is what you and I would get because we had a great response to the first 2 vaccines. It might wear off over time and we might need to get a booster shot. That's different than what they're talking about here. This, again, is for moderate to severe immunocompromised people that need this in order to get that first immune response up to the levels we need it to be in order to keep them safe from this virus, Allison.
All right, so just to make sure I fully understand this, Dr. John, because I think you're pretty aware I'm not a medical expert by now, but what kind of protections will this extra shot give the immunocompromised? It sounds like it will just bring them up to the level where the rest of us are, if I understand correctly. And is this the same amount of vaccine as the initial shots, or is it different?
And actually, Allison, you have a great understanding of this, and that's exactly what we're talking about. It's the same shot. They're just getting a third dose of the same shot that you and I got 2 doses from. And what happened is because they initially got those 2 doses, but their immune system was compromised, they weren't able to mount the immune response. So they're not able to get to the levels of protection that the rest of us can get to. And so the government is saying because of that, and because of this Delta variant that we know is much more contagious than the other variants that have been around, we need to make sure they get to that level. Third dosing will do that. The jury's still out on how well a booster shot's going to work for us or when we're going to need it, but they do think we'll need that at some point. Dr. Fauci and pretty much every expert has said it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when it's going to happen. And you and I have talked about, could it be 6 months, a year, 3 years from now? We simply don't know. We'll have to see how it works out over time, and especially with this Delta variant where that ends up going. But we know right now it's not going in the direction we want it to.
Yeah, it sure isn't. All right, Dr. John, I feel like I am starting to get it, probably because I have someone as wonderful as yourself explaining this to me. You got into this already, but what Dr. Fauci said yesterday, if the data shows the degree of COVID protection drops below a critical level, we could start hearing about boosters for the general population. So is there, in plain non-medical English, some sort of marker, some sort of guiding point that the administration might look at and say, all right, everybody else is going to need a booster, or is it hard to get a fix on what that exact turning point might be?
No, Allison, there are going to be some turning points here, and it's a matter of when, not if, because we do know we're going to need to get it. It's just at what point we're going to need to get that booster shot. And what they're going to do is look at a variety of things. One, they're going to look at variants, see if something other than Delta comes along that's even worse than Delta, see what happens with the Delta variant. But they'll also start looking at people. If they notice more people getting hospitalized with breakthrough infections, more people dying with breakthrough infections, then that's going to send up the red flag saying, hey, we need to look at boosters. On top of that, they'll be checking antibody levels of people. And once they notice those dropping off more than they have, we know they've waned a little bit, but once they reach that cliff and start waning greatly, at that point they'll do it. They want to do it before we actually need it, not wait until we need it and then it's an issue. But the government has said we are set up to do that with the current vaccine we have right now, and these manufacturers are looking at making variant-specific boosters, which should be coming out probably 6 months to a year from now, that if we need those will be available as well, Allison.
All right, so Dr. John, it sounds like this fall and winter we shouldn't pack away all of our summer short sleeves. We might need to roll in those up at some point soon. And I know you'll be on to tell us exactly when that point is. Thank you for being with us today.
You bet.
I'm not afraid, and I'm going to continue doing common sense measures, being clean, washing your hands, but I'm not scared of this. And I take care of these patients, but with the correct personal protective equipment, I'm managing fine.
Some nurses wearing hospital scrubs are protesting the COVID vaccine, but they're not just protesting outside hospitals. They're taking their anti-vax message to social media like TikTok and Facebook. Their misinformation reshared and even going viral. NBC News senior reporter Brandy Zadrozny is covering this story. So, Brandy, let's talk about what happens when these nurses' videos are reshared and thousands of people see this kind of misinformation. What effect does it have?
Well, this particular piece of misinformation is coming from this really small group called America's Healthcare Workers for Medical Freedom. And it's being promoted through, again, this very small Instagram account. It's got 5,500 followers, and it's made up of a stable of registered nurses who are also anti-vaccination influencers. So the danger that they pose is, we talk about something called credibility laundering, and basically package up this entire debunked ideas seen as unsafe when it's not, or that we don't know what's in it when we do. This is all misinformation that's easily answered with facts, and we have, but when you dress it up in scrubs, it makes it seem more credible. These videos are found by hardcore anti-vaxxers who reshare them and really use the credibility of the medical profession and nurses to bolster the misinformation.
Brandy, you spoke with Heather Knapp, a registered home health nurse who has 33,000 Instagram followers. That's pretty impressive. Knapp says she's not anti-vaccination, she's anti-mandates. But here's a clip from one of her recent posts.
The mainstream narrative is full of a lot of lies and half-truths and deception. And, I think that if you are actually paying attention, that you will see that. You'll notice it, and you can see the things that they have withheld from us, information that they continue to withhold.
Brandy, when she says the mainstream narrative is full of lies, it sure sounds like she's discrediting healthcare providers. So how do nurses like Heather kind of explain that? Sounds a little hypocritical.
Logic. An interesting concept. First, I do want to say that I've been reporting on the anti-vaccination movement for over a decade now, and I've only heard one person in the entire time say I am an anti-vaxxer. So take that with a grain of salt. But also, it's important to know, no one is only their profession, right? We have to understand that even in the healthcare professions, people are driven by other political, religious, financial motivations. The woman that I spoke to, Heather, she also sells freedom merch. So there's a financial incentive there as well. At the start of the pandemic, I think we saw a lot of really disparate groups that you would think have nothing in common, sort of all coming together. Conspiracy theorists, anti-vaxxers, wellness influencers, far-right groups, white supremacists, and you had them all aligning under this banner of liberty. And we're seeing that again now, with the vaccination mandates and masking rules. It's really revived these coalitions. And so you see those protests and with the nurses standing in scrubs, but you also see a lot of other folks wearing MAGA hats or with conspiracy signs. So really, you just have to take all of that under consideration.
Brandy, how successful have social media sites like TikTok and Facebook been in stopping this misinformation on their platforms? I know they've been struggling to stop misinformation of all stripes, whether it has to do with vaccines or otherwise.
Yeah, they failed. Like it's, the pandemic, we've been in here since 2020 when they first got together and said in February and March that they were all going to band together and stop misinformation on the platform, called it an infodemic, and said that they really care. And all of the platforms have tried and have created policy measures and enforcement measures to sort of stop it. And we still have it going on. It's not working. To be fair, it's hard. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, they're all doing stuff. They could do a better job. But as I speak to researchers all the time, and they're really talking about the anti-vaccination movement as an insurgency now. It's hard to tell where they're coming from. They're winning hearts and minds. We're just losing this war.
All right, Brandy Zadrozny, I know you've been covering this forever, and it just doesn't seem to go away. Thanks so much for your reporting. Anti-Asian attacks aren't going away, according to Stop AAPI Hate. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders reporting more than 9,000 incidents during the pandemic, a quarter of those coming in from April to June of 2021. NBC News Asian America reporter Kimmy Yam joins us now. So, Kimmy, what kind of incidents are people reporting, and where are they happening?
Hi, Allison. Yeah, we're really seeing some trends that we've previously noticed in some of the older reports. One of the biggest forms of discrimination is verbal harassment, and then the second highest would be shunning. I think physical incidents made up the third largest share, and they're happening mostly in public streets as well as businesses at this point.
What are experts telling you, Kimmy, about the numbers they're seeing?
Yeah, one thing that is very important to note about, kind of the results that we're seeing this time around, and I think that there has been some misreporting around this kind of information, is that there seems to be a very large rise, right, in reports. But we have to keep in mind that this is reporting. And as we talk more about anti-Asian incidents, as we think a lot more and this kind of these issues come to the fore and into the mainstream consciousness, more people are becoming more comfortable to report these incidents. And that was a huge, and has been, and probably still is, a huge issue among the Asian American community, because there were, a lot of fears about retaliation. There are language barriers, and there was, less awareness around these reporting systems. And so it's difficult to equate kind of this rise that we're seeing in these statistics, the rise in reporting, to an actual, a mirrored rise, I guess, in real actual incidents, in the real world. But that doesn't mean that there aren't incidents happening, or there are fewer incidents, occurring now. One thing that experts also noted was that other surveys did show that there still is a huge issue in terms of, underreporting, and that some surveys did show that upwards of 2 million Asian Americans experienced hate incidents since the start of the pandemic.
Let's talk about political bias here. Many Americans blame the heightened bias on former President Trump's rhetoric, but he's gone and the bias certainly is not. So how are experts explaining that?
Right. I think that in talking about this issue, some have kind of, relied on more simple explanations in terms of what's really going on, when in fact experts have stressed that a lot of the hate incidents that we've seen, the seeds of such behavior, are much deeper than what has kind of been portrayed in the media. I think that some people have brought up that, after 9/11, there was kind of this rise in white supremacy that did contribute to kind of this undercurrent of anti-Asian hate. And that continues to this day. Another thing, that is ongoing is this kind of very aggressive anti-China rhetoric. As we've seen in the Senate, there was an anti-China bill that was very popular among both Democrats and Republicans. And, the idea is that right now, without an investment in technology, that we will be, losing this so-called race in technological advancements. In this contest that we have with China, or the supposed contest we have with China. And this is all going to kind of contribute to this more Red Scare-esque rhetoric that Stop AAPI Hate has been tracking. Another issue that is in a lot of experts, or a lot of experts have concerns over, are the results from the investigation on the origins of the virus and whether or not, there are findings from this Wuhan lab and how that might, spill into public consciousness and how people will interpret that and, treat Asian Americans or discriminate against Asian Americans because of it.
All right, Camille, thank you so much for your reporting. A Texas commissioner saying gender-affirming surgery amounts to child abuse. The head of the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services saying, quote, such mutilation may cause a genuine threat of substantial harm from physical injury to the child. NBC News Out editorial director Brooke Sapelsa joins me now. Brooke, the commissioner saying allegations of such surgeries will be promptly and thoroughly investigated and any appropriate actions will be taken. What could they do here? What do they mean by appropriate action?
So there are a few things here. So there's what they say they could do and what they might be able to do under Texas law. So in their letter, they say that they're going to treat gender-affirming surgery performed on minors as child abuse. So they specifically list in the letter that professionals in the state who suspect child abuse is going on in the form of gender-affirming surgery for minors, they could be subjected to $4,000 fines and a year in jail. Now, Texas law, the penalty for child abuse goes up to 99 years in jail and fines. So that's what they say they could do here, right? But then there are two additional issues that are important for context. In the state of Texas, the Texas Family Code determines what child abuse is, and that is interpreted by a judge. It's not interpreted by the head of the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. So according to the ACLU of Texas, this will have little or no legal impact. There's another important issue here for context, and it's that gender-affirming surgery is not the standard of care for minors, for transgender minors. The standard of care for transgender minors is socially transitioning. So it's, wearing clothes that align with your gender identity, changing your name. And the other standard of care, and this is for older minors, is puberty blockers or puberty suppressing hormones. This is why LGBTQ advocates and, trans advocates in Texas say this is a non-issue, driven more so by politics than by science. And it's addressing an issue that is not happening in the state.
So, Brooke, it's not just Texas, right? I mean, Texas is one of at least 20 states that's trying to legislatively ban transgender health care for minors. So let's talk about the kids here. How does this affect them, many of whom are already in crisis?
So, folks say it's not just when a bill like this passes that trans youth are affected. Yeah. It's also when bills like this are proposed. My colleague Joe Yerkeba did a great report back in April where they talked to families in states that either had passed such legislation or were considering, and they were actually considering leaving the state to not subject their children to, the impact of such bills or to the bullying that they could face. And right now, we only have 2 states across the U.S. that have actually passed such legislation, Arkansas and Tennessee. So, but as you mentioned, there have been at least 20 states that have proposed such legislation, and Texas being one of them. But they, as of yet, have not been able to pass that bill. So some are also saying that these letters are a way of trying to circumvent the legislature in the state.
All right, Brooke, it's really unbelievable what these kids are going through and the support that they are not getting. Thank you so much for your reporting today. It's time for The Bottom Line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. It is Friday, and the markets are roaring into the weekend, both the Dow and the S&P hitting fresh highs. Here's a look at how the Dow closed out the week, up 15 points, just above that 35,500 mark. The market's higher today in spite of a disappointing August reading on consumer sentiment. So let's get out to Investopedia editor-in-chief Caleb Silver, our favorite guy to talk financials with on a Friday. So, Caleb, the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index dropping to 70.2 today. That might mean absolutely nothing to our viewers, but this will. That is the worst number in almost 10 years. Consumers are not feeling good right now. What's going on?
All of a sudden, consumers are starting to feel a little bit skittish. So you could blame it on the rise of COVID-19. You could blame it on inflation. You could blame it on the fact that we've been running pretty strong in this recovery for a while, but now there looks like there's going to be some hiccups, whether that's more mask mandates, more economic restrictions, certainly higher prices have something to do with it. So consumers are feeling shaky. Let me give you this fact. The last time it fell this much was in 2020 of last year, April of 2020, right in the height of the pandemic, and in March of 2008, right in the teeth of the great financial crisis. So the fact that it dropped this much month over month is pretty shocking. We're going to see how this translates into spending going forward, because as we know, consumer spending is 70% of gross domestic product in this country.
Yeah, we sure need it. That's for certain. All right, Caleb, we also got consumer and producer prices earlier this week, too. The bottom line there, just about everything is more expensive. So let's talk about where people are feeling the pain and what's going on with inflation.
Sure. It's still red hot. It's cooling a little bit on the consumer pricing front. We saw consumer prices rise 5.4% year over year, on pace with what happened the month before. But everywhere you look, bacon up 11%, fish up 10%, steak up 10% as well. Coffee beans, 50%. That's more of a problem with what's happening in Brazil with the drought there. But still, coffee bean prices up 50%. That's translating to higher coffee prices. You know what the average price for a retail cup of coffee is these days? $2.99. That may be with all the fixings and everything else, but still, we're paying more. That's something nobody's going to cut back on. Yeah. Consumers are feeling it, and producers are feeling it on the producer prices. That was up 7.8%, highest year-over-year jump in 13 years.
Caleb, that graphic was beautiful, but I also hate it because all the things I love are more expensive. Bacon, great. Fish, great. Coffee, great. All more expensive. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the last time that I paid $2.99 for a cup of coffee. That almost sounds like a deal. They're like $5 and $6 these days. We're certainly feeling the pain. All right, so all of this talk about prices, about inflation, brings us to your term of the week, taper tantrum. What is that all about?
Well, that's not when you freak out at your tailor because you tapered your pants too tight. It's when it refers to 2013 when Ben Bernanke was the Fed chairman. The Fed was buying $80 billion of government bonds every month. Yeah. A throwback, absolutely. They were buying $80 billion in government bonds every month, and they started to slow those purchases or allude to the fact that the Fed was going to slow those purchases back in 2013. Markets freaked out. Investors freaked out. They were dragging the safety net away from the capital markets. Now there's talk about when the Fed's going to taper these asset purchases of $120 billion a month. They've been buying those monthly bonds since May or June of last year. So that's a huge safety net under capital markets. That's given stock investors a lot of boldness to keep buying stocks. It's also kept interest rates down. But when is that going to happen? And that's the discussion inside the Federal Reserve these days. It sounds wonky, but what it really alludes to is when are they going to take the punch bowl away and let the capital markets fend for themselves? As soon as that happens, we're going to be in for a rocky ride.
Ugh. All right, Caleb, I got to go, but I know we'll see you again next week, and we've got more earnings, retail sales ahead. We'll have you back next Friday to break it all down. In the meantime, have a terrific weekend.
You too. Thank you.
I've seen a lot of burnout. I've seen a lot of passion dying away.
COVID frustrations causing a crisis in our schools. More and more teachers are quitting, and there aren't enough new ones coming in. NBC News correspondent Shaq Brewster is at a middle school in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I hope I said that right, Shaq. 1 in 4 teachers likely to leave their jobs by the end of the 2021 school year. All right. Thank you, friend. According to the RAND Corporation, teacher retirements up 14% there in Wisconsin last year. It's pretty obvious that COVID is taking a toll. What are their biggest frustrations?
Yeah, it's some pretty striking numbers that you see there. And one thing that teachers keep repeating to me is that it's not just COVID, it's just that COVID made things worse. It made the common problems difficult. One thing you hear is politicization. Political debate, I'll leave it at that. And it's the political debate, and the difference is just think about the mask debate that you're hearing. Listen to what one teacher told me.
You know, it's just not a system that's working, and the politicization of education is just getting worse and worse. And you know, when the finances don't line up and the support doesn't line up, and you don't see the picture getting any better, why would anyone stay? And now, even worse, why would anyone get into this?
That is a former chemistry teacher. He retired after working 29 years and left to essentially help at a family bakery. He says that the difficulties in the school, it's what drove him out, especially considering this pandemic. Allison.
Shaq, districts are struggling to fill all those vacancies. They're saying they can't even get enough applicants. Forget about qualified applicants. So what are they doing about it? This can't go on indefinitely.
Right, they're having to get creative in terms of the recruitment issues, going to less traditional paths to find new teachers. Listen to what one teacher in Michigan told us about this process.
Consistency and routine is crucially important for kids, especially special education students. I kind of equate it to thinking like, if your boss was different every year, imagine that. Some of these students have a different boss 2 or 3 times a year. There's constant turnover, and those kids never get that consistency and that routine that really is required.
You know, one point that she made is that it's the idea that you have this consistent turnover and they don't know when new teachers are coming. They're seeing applicants, but they're not getting the same amount of applicants that they would get before. If there was one opening before, she said they would get 15 to 20 applications. Now they're having to decide between 1 or 2 applications, and that's having an impact on children. Allison?
Yeah, no doubt. All right, Shaq Brewster, I'm not going to try it again. I'm just going to say you're in Wisconsin. Thank you so much.
You got it.
California, the largest state in the U.S. by population, but its COVID case rate well below the national average. So how's the state with so many people keeping the Delta variant under control? NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce joining us now from Los Angeles. Simone, what is California doing right?
Well, Allison, the biggest point of comparison when we talk about what's happening in California versus Texas and Florida, some of those southern hotspots in terms of cases and hospitalizations, is really California's vaccination rate. We have a higher than average vaccination rate here in California. When you talk about the percentage of people in the population that are over the age of 12, so eligible to be vaccinated, the percentage of people in California that are partially vaccinated is over 77%. In Texas and Florida, they haven't broken through that 70% mark. They're both sort of hovering in that mid-60s to high 60s percentage range. So vaccinations, obviously a huge factor here, because we know that the majority of people who are sitting in hospital beds right now with the coronavirus are the unvaccinated. Now, another thing that we really can't overlook is the way that leaders in Florida, Texas, and California are approaching the messaging around this Delta variant surge that we're seeing right now. And I asked Dr. Robert Wachter about this. He's from the Department of Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. And here's what he had to say.
The political leadership at the state level and at the regional city level has been unambiguous that this variant is much more infectious, that if we're not more careful until we get more and more people vaccinated, that we're going to have lots of cases. We'll have our hospitals overrun. That has happened in California. It clearly has not happened in Texas and in Florida, and the consequences are really quite dire.
So obviously, we are hearing the governors of Florida and Texas opposing mask mandates or vaccine requirements of any kind. And by comparison, this week, San Francisco became the first city in the state of California to essentially bar unvaccinated people from enjoying a number of indoor activities like dining inside, like attending movie theaters, like working out at gyms. And Los Angeles County is considering taking similar steps as well. One more piece of news that broke this week in the state of California on this front. In the Los Angeles Unified School District, now all teachers, all school employees will be required to be fully vaccinated by October 15th. And the messaging that we're hearing from local leaders about these steps that are taking is that they want to encourage more people to get vaccinated. Allison.
All right, Simone Boyce in Los Angeles, thank you. It's a murder case that was all over the news in Philadelphia back in 1988. A 4-year-old girl dead, her body found in a box just blocks from her home. Walter Ogrod wrongfully convicted of her murder on death row for 28 years. In a new Dateline special airing tonight, NBC's Lester Holt sits down with Ogrod for his first network television interview.
It's wanted for yesterday's murder of the little girl.
In 1992, 4 years after an unthinkable murder rocked Philadelphia, police announced they found the killer and that he'd confessed. His name was Walter Ogrod, a single 27-year-old truck driver who once lived across the street from 4-year-old Barbara Jean Horn.
He let that poor little baby just lie there. If that's not intent to kill, maybe I haven't seen it yet.
Prosecutors were seeking the death penalty. Ogrod claimed that he was innocent and that detectives coerced a false confession from him. The little girl's parents were outraged.
How did you feel to hear him describe that story?
Angry. I wanted him dead. I did.
Did you kill Barbara Jean Horn?
No, I did not. I did not do anything to that child at all.
The jury didn't believe him, and Ogrod was found guilty and sentenced to die.
Did you look at the jury?
Yeah, and they're like they stone-faced. They're like, yeah, we want to just get rid of you.
5 years later, he wrote a letter to a journalist named Tom Lowenstein, imploring him to investigate his case. Lowenstein was stunned by what he discovered.
I thought I was plucking a little bit of a weed, and the more I pulled, the more of this tree just keeps coming up and coming up.
There is a systemic pattern of unbridled misconduct in the city of Philadelphia, and it shocks the conscience.
Civil rights attorney Amelia Green says the city's corrupt criminal justice system has ensnared Walter Ogrod and countless others.
And I've found another case from the exact same time period where another man is claiming that he is innocent. And so then you keep digging and you find another one.
In 2017, Philadelphia's newly elected district attorney Larry Krasner hired Patricia Cummings to lead a revamped conviction integrity unit. They found police and prosecutors lied and hid evidence. When I spoke with Cummings, she made an extraordinary admission rarely heard from a prosecutor.
So what are you asking the court to do?
We are asking the court to vacate the conviction because we believe that the conviction as it stands is a gross miscarriage of justice.
But would that be enough to free Walter Ogrod?
You can see Lester's complete story tonight on Dateline at 10, 9 Central on your NBC station.